Welcome to the Vermont School Board Association Online Academy. My name is Laura Soares, and today I'm going to talk about the governance process policies. This section of policies talks about how the board operates itself. Usually it starts with a commitment from the board as to a governing style. And the board says things such as, we're going to focus more on the future than on the past. We're going to be proactive rather than reactive. And we're going to spend more time focusing on student results than on how we get there. Although we will discuss prudent operations and make sure that our district is operating appropriately. The board in this section of policies also writes its own job description. And in policy governance, your job contains at least 3 things. The first is a responsibility to connect with the community. Listen to the community, make sure their values are reflected at the board table and in policies, and also keep the community informed. What are you learning as a board, and how are we monitoring our district? Where are we working, and where do we have challenges? The second area is to make sure that the board continually adopts policies and keeps them up to date and actually lives with those policies. So the 4 policy areas the board has as a job product and continually reviews those and makes sure that they still reflect the values of the community. The third job description of the board is to monitor, to constantly ensure that the district is operating appropriately as set out in policies, and that the board monitors itself. Now the board may choose to add other job description items. Some districts in Vermont continue to negotiate contracts with staff, while others delegate that to the superintendent. If your board is going to continue to do that, this is where you make that announcement. You also recognize that by doing so, you take responsibility for the outcome, and the superintendent does not have responsibility for the outcome because you've decided it was a board job. Other potential board job descriptions: closing of school buildings. The board may not want to delegate that. Naming of different buildings or mascots. The board may not want to delegate that. Anything that the board is unwilling to delegate and wants to keep as its own job needs to be listed in this policy section. Also in this area, the board talks about the role of the chair, what authority is given to the chair, so that it's clear, if you're the chairperson of the board, the authority that you have, as well as the responsibility that you have back to the board. This is where the board talks about conflict of interest, and the required conflict of interest policy gets incorporated in this section. Code of conduct issues get mentioned here, so that the Vermont School Board Code of Conduct would be incorporated into this section of policy. Committees. If the board chooses to use committees, it needs to follow policy governance kinds of philosophy. So it's important that a committee of the board does board work, not superintendent work, not operational work. So the board would not have a curriculum committee, because curriculum would be delegated to the superintendent, and the superintendent may delegate that further within the system. The board may serve on a curriculum committee if the superintendent has a curriculum committee and feels that it would be beneficial for the board to serve on it, but it wouldn't be a board committee. A board might have a committee, however, that does work for the board. So if we're going to have a series of community engagement forums, maybe we want a small committee to do the legwork on that. How many forums? Where are we going to have them? What kinds of materials do we need? And that committee could look at the options and the logistics and do some of the legwork for the board. Maybe we want to have a committee that drafts an ends policy and brings a couple different options for the board to then debate and look at. A committee would never do the adoption of the policy, but it could start to frame the issues for the board so that the board discussion at the board meeting is more focused. So if the board chooses to use committees, it needs to set some guidelines in this area of policy. And finally, another important area to address in the governance process section is investment in governing. It's really too expensive to have boards that do a poor job in governing. So it's important that we invest in ourselves. So this policy would outline the fact that, first of all, that you will invest in good governing. And secondly, maybe what your budget would be. So how much money would be allocated during the year for professional development for the board to do its work as far as the cost of community forums, materials, workshops, and so on. So this is the section of policy where the board discusses and makes decisions around how it will do its own work. And we have some models for you to look at as a starting point, but it's important that they get customized to fit your own board. Thank you.